Just 5 months ago, European Championship recorded its highest attendance for a football match, and it was the Euro 2022 Women's Championship final between England and Germany, which England went on to win by 2-1. It recorded a total of 87,192 people in the iconic Wembley Stadium in London. Women's football has continued to grow over the half-decade and is currently one of the highest-growing sports in the world. But how and when did the sport come to life across Europe? How has it grown to this extent? Let's find out. How and when did women's football come to life across Europe? In England, it can be traced down to the 19th century, far back in 1869, which was the year that Harper's Bazaar published a watercolor painting titled "Girls of the Period Playing Ball." The painting showed some women in dresses and waistcoats shoving each other for the control of a ball. This painting was proof that women's football started far back in the 19th century. The first known game of women's football stretched back to 1881, which was a foundation for the formation of clubs in the United Kingdom 4 years later. Around March 1885, there was a match between the north side and south side of London, in which the north won 7-1. This match recorded an attendance of close to 10,000 people. Since then, more people started attending their matches, and there were cries for women's football to be made official. Even when World War I started, women's football continued to rise. More teams began to be formed, even in unlikely places, but the most famous example comes from Preston in England. In 1917, women workers at Dick, Kerr & Company factory, who produced military ammunition throughout World War I, started playing football against male workers during their lunch breaks. The women were mostly the winners, and this success made them form the Dick Kerr Ladies FC later that year. Their matches always attracted a lot of attention and crowd, and by 1920, they had set a record attendance of approximately 53,000 in their match against St. Helen, which they won 4-0. By then, there were over 150 amateur clubs, and this proved as a threat to the FA, because some of their matches had begun to have more attendance than male football. In 1921, women's football was officially banned in England because the FA claimed it was not suitable for women. England wasn't the only country in Europe that banned women's football around that time. In France, women's football had already risen to the extent that they had a league set up in 1918 by their Independent Women's Football Federation. The sport took longer to get banned, but it eventually got its ban in 1932. In Germany, women's football started far back in the 18th century. They had a richer history compared to other big European nations. The sport continued to flourish even after World War I and lasted almost 3 decades until 1955, when the Germany Football Association declared that it would no longer permit women into its association. In Spain, women's football wasn't even recognized as a sport, and so they weren't allowed to play football at all. Eventually, all these bans were lifted across Europe between the 1960s and 1980s. Women's football was allowed again, but they weren't as strong as how they were before the ban. Clubs began the rebuilding process all over again, but eventually they conquered. How has it grown to this extent? The first official women's international match was between France and Netherlands in 1971. The growth on the international scene began. Mexico hosted a Women's World Cup just 14 months after the 1970 Men's World Cup finals. The tournament was backed by big-name investors, and it exceeded all expectations. The finals, that Denmark won, had an attendance of approximately 110,000 fans. This was amazing. In just over a decade, the sport exploded, and it held its first official Women's European Championship. It comprised just 4 teams: England, Denmark, Italy, and Sweden after the qualifying campaign. The tournament was won by Sweden. Getting an official Women's World Cup was hard at that time, with some countries still banning women's football. With many countries now overturning the ban on women's football, FIFA decided to test run the tournament to know if it was feasible. They decided to host the tournament in China in 1988, which comprised 12 countries, and that tournament was deemed a success by FIFA. In 1991, the first official Women's World Cup tournament took place in China. It comprised 12 countries, just like the test run. with the USA running out as eventual winners of the tournament. Since then, women's football had continued to grow and be on a fast rise. Different countries began to form their domestic leagues and encouraged the sport. Now, women's football is evident in multiple countries around the world. It is now popular that FIFA hosts their various tournaments, just like the men's tournaments. Do you guys foresee a tournament where men play against women in the future? Let me know in the comments section. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It goes a long way in pushing the video up the algorithm and putting a smile on our faces.